Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne. I'm from Wales, and I am concerned that the Welsh Government is playing God with children's lives. From the age of 7, the Welsh Government mandate that children are taught that people have an internal gender as well as an external sex. There is no scientific evidence that this is anything but a psychological condition. Many people believe that this teaching facilitates the development of gender dysphoria in children who have problems fitting in or who are uncomfortable with their body, as they rationalise their feelings by subscribing to the belief that they have a gender that is different to their sex. Traditionally, psychotherapists have adopted a developmentally informed approach in treating children with gender dysphoria, as Dr. Stephen Levine, former chair of the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, Standards of Care, now known as WPATH, explains.
In a young child, we would view attraction to a transgender identity as likely as an adaptation to a psychological problem that was first manifested as a failure to establish a comfortable, conventional sense of self in early childhood. In an adolescent, clinicians would look for fear or a sense of failure associated with the roles that the individual associates with his or her biologic sex. In other words, we're very thoughtful about the things that a child may misunderstand, may not have lived long enough to grasp yet. Many young children, trans-identified boys, think that males can only exist in this range of behavior, whereas when they're older, they will understand you can be a man in any one of these ways. And similarly for girls. This is a child's thinking, not a grown-up's thinking.
Highly experienced psychotherapist Ken Zucker worked at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH, in Canada. He is considered a world authority on the treatment of children with gender dysphoria. On the 12th of January 2017, the BBC broadcast a documentary entitled Transgender Kids, Who Knows Best? Zucker, along with his colleague Devita Singh, were interviewed for the film. Devita Singh stated, "Let's see if there's any chance that this child could feel comfortable with their biological sex. Let's see if we can teach this girl that there are lots of ways to be a girl. Some girls like Barbies and some do not. Some girls like dresses and some do not. Both are equally acceptable." Following the broadcast, Zucker was accused by former Stonewall Chief Executive Officer Ruth Hunt of practicing conversion therapy. Dr. Az Hakim from North Wales worked for many years at the Tavistock Clinic. On a podcast, he was questioned by psychotherapist Sasha Ayad.
What do you think the role is of our maybe overly rigid ideas about male and female? That kind of goes into gender ideology, right? These kind of categories and boxes.
You can't have gender ideology without gender stereotypes. And, I describe people as being either gender confident or gender underconfident, like a spectrum. And the gender confident person can say, well, I can do this and it doesn't fit in your framework, so your framework's rubbish. Whereas the gender underconfident person goes, oh my God, I'm not quite right. I need to change myself to fit into the framework. And all my trans or gender people, they all describe very, very rigid stereotypes. They all say, well, men like this, and this, women like this, and this, and because I don't fit in with this, whereas if you say to them, well, okay, so you're a boy, but you feel that the things about you aren't male. Surely if they're about you and you're a boy, they are male. They're you just need to widen your repertoire of what it is to be a boy.
Dr. Hakim has been accused of practicing conversion therapy by former Stonewall Chief Executive Officer Nancy Kelly. The Welsh Government Deputy Minister for Social Partnership, Hannah Blythin, describes conversion therapy practices as abhorrent.
Just last month I set out the next steps in our work to ban conversion practices. Support services have been expanded across Wales and a working group of experts has been formed. The group will provide us with the advice and expertise we need to consign these abhorrent practices to history.
Many experts believe that social transition should be avoided because it locks in a child's misguided sense of self.
I don't think that the concept of we have a 6-year-old who's non-gender conforming and that we ought to affirm that child and lead that child to believe that she can be a boy or she can be a girl. I don't think that's helping with what psychiatrists call the reality testing of the child. A comparison of recent and older studies suggests that when affirming methodology is used with children, a substantial proportion of those children who would otherwise have desisted if left alone persist in their gender identity. In other words, gender affirming of children leads to a very high incidence of trans identity at puberty and the failure to desist. Whereas if you leave the children alone, many of them will desist. If you treat them young and intervene and support, they're going to have a transgender identity in adolescence. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what does that mean for the long run of the child?
In contrast, in the LGBTQ plus action plan for Wales, the Welsh Government state that delaying or preventing a person from having their identity respected can have a negative impact on their lives, and cite the work of lawyer and trans-identified male Florence Ashley, who argues that unbounded social transition and ready access to puberty blockers ought to be treated as the default option. And support should be offered to parents who may have difficulty accepting their youth. Ashley publishes videos on TikTok.
As a law professor who teaches criminal law, I felt compelled to inform you to be gay, do crimes. Also, look at my pretty earrings today.
The Welsh Government recommend that a socially transitioned child is celebrated. In the Welsh Gender Service, comprehensive mental health assessment is not performed. The lead clinician at the Welsh Gender Service is Sophie Quinney, and in contrast to those who are experienced using a developmentally informed approach to working with people with gender dysphoria, Quinney is highly affirmative.
So we've adopted some of the things that we think are done really well. So, for example, because we now have our own service, we don't require people to go through the mental health teams. If they're age 17 and a half and over, they can be referred directly now to the Welsh service by their GP. So that's a huge relief to have that put in place.
Quinney will be leading on the work to establish a young person's gender service for Wales. Another of the clinicians working at the Welsh Gender Service is Kate Nambiar, a trans-identified male.
I'm Kate, and I'm a trans woman. Been a doctor since 1999, and for a lot of that time, I didn't want to talk about being trans. It was fear, it was shame, really, I think. When I transitioned back in the 1990s, there wasn't really very many positive role models out there. And actually what we had was a lot of negative feedback from the media of the time. Hatred that is often apparent when people, stick their necks over the parapet to say, hey, here I am, I'm trans, I'm proud of being trans. It worries me, upsets me, it makes me angry. At the end of the day, we're human beings. We have a right to be the people that we are. The recognition of us as trans and non-binary people is something that comes from us. It's not something that's decided by somebody else based on a list of criteria that we have to meet or a set of hurdles that we have to jump through. We're the ones that make that first step. We're the ones who are telling other people that's who we are.
Nambiar is highly critical of the organisation Fair Play for Women, who campaigned to raise awareness of the problems with self-ID. And he frames anyone who holds gender-critical views as being motivated by hate rather than by any legitimate concern. Another of the clinicians who works at the Cardiff Centre but is not mentioned on their website, possibly because of their notoriety, is Adrian Harrop. Harrop has spent an inordinate amount of time harassing women on Twitter, so much so that he gained a reputation on Mumsnet. In 2021, he was suspended for 1 month by the General Medical Council for his behaviour. One woman was doxxed repeatedly by him and labelled a disgusting transphobic bigot, and he compared J.K. Rowling to Jimmy Savile. Harrop is friends with Helen Weberly, the founder of Gender GP, the controversial online website. He's also friends with Stephanie Hayden, a trans-identified male. Both are friends with Susie Green, former Chief Executive Officer of Mermaids. Harrop formed a tag team with Hayden in a particularly vindictive campaign against Catholic campaigner Carolyn Farrow. The gaslighting and bullying of Carolyn Farrow, with the obvious aim of causing her anxiety and distress, is documented on the Substack account of Graham Linehan. In 2018, Harrop was successful in having a poster displaying the definition of woman taken down. He defended his actions in a debate with women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane.
A giant poster quoting a Google dictionary definition of the word woman has been removed from a wall in Liverpool. The poster read, woman, women, noun, adult, human, female. But according to one LGBTQ activist, it qualified as hate speech and was deemed dangerous for transgender women. I'm joined now from Newcastle by Dr. Adrian Harrop, who campaigned for the poster's removal. And in our central London studio, we can speak to Kelly J. Keane Minshall, founder of the women's rights organisation Standing for Women, who were behind the poster. Hello to you both. Dr. Adrian Harrop, to you first. What is so offensive about the dictionary definition of women?
There is nothing inherently offensive with the dictionary definition of women. That really isn't what this was about at all. This is about what that particular poster, presented in that particular way, in that particular location, represents, and what the underlying meaning and the thinking that was driving putting up that poster.
So what was the underlying meaning then? To anyone looking at it, was it any more than a dictionary definition?
So that poster was put up by a campaign group that is led by Miss Keane Minshall, who has led and spearheaded a campaign against trans people, particularly against trans women, that's extended over several months now, mostly online, but also in a real life environment, where she sought to demonise trans women and to highlight them as dangerous sexual predators. This poster that was put up is a symbol of that campaign. It is that campaign made flesh, as it were, and for transgender people who are living and working in Liverpool, it is a reminder to them that they are under such immense public scrutiny for every single aspect of their identity, their behaviour, their body shape, their appearance. And that campaign is led by this woman, Miss Keane Minshall, aka Posey Parker. And that's the reason why it should have been taken down.
Let's get a response then from Kelly J. Keane Minshall. This was part of a targeted transphobic campaign by you and your organisation.
Well, firstly, I'd like to remind Mr. Harrop that I'm married, so I'm Mrs. Keane Minshall. And secondly, the point of this campaign was simply to highlight the absurdity that in 2018, saying woman equals adult human female is an offensive thing to say. And Mr. Harrop delightfully has proven that point by having a tantrum and contacting every CEO or every executive on the board of PrimeSite until it got removed.
But this wasn't a one-off, though. This wasn't just a poster that you put up with the definition of woman on it. And we should say you're wearing that definition on the T-shirt that you're wearing today, Kelly J, as well. What Mr. Harrop is saying, that this was part of a long-running campaign by you and your organisation, and as such, it was offensive.
How is the definition of woman offensive?
Adrian Harrop.
What a ludicrous thing to say.
Adrian Harrop, your
It
response.
really isn't about the definition itself, though, is it, Posey? It's not about that. It's about the fact that you have specifically
You can address me as
and
Mrs. Keane
explicitly...
Minshall, Adrian Harrop.
Mrs. Keane Minshall, I apologise, and it's Dr. Harrop, thank you. You have explicitly excluded trans women from your definition of women.
Absolutely, of course I exclude trans women for the definition of woman, adult human female.
That is not something that is appropriate.
Would you like to explain to us all, as a doctor, what a woman is, Mr. Harrop?
A woman? Dr. Harrop, thank you, Mrs. Keane Minshall. A woman is a person who identifies as a woman.
Is that what you do when somebody comes into A&E? You ask their identity before you treat them?
Absolutely not, Mrs. Keane Minshall, and you are fully aware of that.
It's not about identity, is it?
I do not identify...
What you're seeking to do, what you and your misogynistic allies seek to do, is erase what it means to be a woman in law and in life. And that is why this campaign has been absolutely essential. If you didn't push women to the point that we are very, very angry, that we feel we have to protect the language around us by using words like cervix havers, menstruators, cervical cancer, obliterating the word woman, not even using it in campaign material, we wouldn't feel the need to assert the fact that the meaning of woman is only the definition, is only adult human female. So I think the ball is very much in your court.
What do you have, Kelly J. Keane Minshall, against trans women?
I don't. I just don't think they're women.
Another clinician who works as part of the Welsh gender team is Stuart Lorimer. In 2010, Lorimer set up a private practice called Gender Care, but admits that his motive wasn't altruistic. Lorimer writes, "Doctors have mortgages too, and my partner was on the verge of retirement. In the UK, the coalition government showed every sign of squeezing the NHS in what has turned out to be the longest public sector pay freeze for many decades. I was looking for ways to generate more income." Although in 2017 he admitted to having limited experience of gender dysphoria in children and adolescents, Lorimer has advertised his services on Tumblr. Lorimer is great friends with Susie Green, former Chief Executive Officer of Mermaids, and clients of Gender Care have reported being prescribed testosterone after one appointment. Twitter user Sunmum has written about gender affirmation. For gender identity, there is no well-founded theoretical model, no objective test. We simply have to believe in the authority of the expert. Believe me, because I say so. For the young people who visit Gender Care, diagnosis by a gender specialist offers confirmation and validation of their internal sense of self. YouTube videos about my first visit to Gender Care form a genre of their own, revealing the overwhelming power of this validation. One young person reports, "It were a really positive experience. He were very validating, and he shouldn't have been, because I obviously know that someone validating your experience isn't necessary. But hearing him saying the words, saying he's diagnosed me, he's signing me off, it's like all my Christmases have come at once." In a subsequent article, Sunmum has written about gender medicine in general in the UK. Gender medicine asks GPs to behave in ways for which they have not been trained. Perhaps the protocols of gender specialists are increasingly diverging from those of the other medical specialities, and this gives the doctors pause. Or perhaps these GPs are concerned about the influence that activist groups like Mermaids and Action for Trans Health are having on transgender healthcare. After all, these groups are pushing for earlier and swifter intervention. In evidence to the UK Parliament Transgender Equality Inquiry in 2015, Susie Green of Mermaids spoke of the frustration of parents with NHS treatment pathways and explained that her organisation helped them to access early intervention abroad. Many activist groups believe the role of the clinician is only to supply the drugs and medication requested by the transgender patient. Perhaps GPs are concerned that activists are driving treatment decisions that rightfully belong in the hands of medical professionals. In 2009, one of the leading British gender specialists, Dr. Stuart Lorimer, a psychiatric consultant at Charing Cross Gender Identity Clinic and founder of Gender Care, a London private gender clinic, was asked what he saw as his biggest impediment in the development of gender identity services. The answer was medical colleagues, GPs, other psychiatrists. Lorimer mentioned a survey of 1,000 doctors, of which 84% felt that gender services are not legitimate, not deserved, should not be in the NHS. In Wales, bypassing those GPs who hold concerns about the affirmation model is not a problem. Dr. Alessandro Ceccarelli, him, is head of LGBTQ+ policy for the Welsh Government, leading on the development and implementation of the LGBTQ+ Action Plan for Wales. He is not backwards in publicising his achievements on his website, alessandroceccarelli.com. In February 2020, Ceccarelli was a guest speaker at a National Student Pride event hosted by Ellie Barnes. In a tweet publicising the event, Barnes was described as the best friend for life. Barnes is head of Educate and Celebrate and makes no secret of her political aims that Ceccarelli evidently shares.
There's loads of reasons why so many people should be so fearful of gender identity and sexual orientation as a whole. I mean, us as teachers, for example, have got the legacy of Section 28, where we weren't allowed legally to talk about anything to do with LGBT+ in our schools. But thank goodness that was repealed in 2003. And that's like relatively, it's not that long ago. And of course, we didn't get any Ofsted criteria until 2012. So really, it's only been this period of 5 years where we've really been able to get stuck into this work and to make it a very usual thing in our schools. Because what we need to do, quite clearly, is we need to smash heteronormativity and we need to realise that not everyone is born male or female.
In the LGBT diary section of his website, we learn that as well as running seminars on the Beginner's Guide to Pronouns and being the Welsh representative for Queer Britain, Ceccarelli raised money for Trans Aid Cymru, an organisation that aims to raise funds for gender affirmation surgery and protest at meetings of women's groups. The organisation has created a web page where young people with gender distress can seek out those GPs who Sophie Quinney approves of. And those like Dr. Simon Braybrook from Buttown Medical Practice, who is part of a local gender team and is always trans-affirming. The webpage also highlights those GPs to avoid, like Dr. Stuart Gray from Whitchurch Village Practice, who, it is thought, will tell people that detransitioning rates are high, and because of the prefrontal cortex not being developed enough, teens get these ideas that they later regret. The Welsh Government do make it very easy for young people who are uncomfortable with their bodies to get them physically changed. Those parents who would prefer that the Welsh Government didn't play God with children's lives may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales.